A city bus screeches to a stop. An old woman crashes to the floor while everyone keeps scrolling. No one moves, except one man in a worn hoodie. When he lifts her up, the bus goes silent, because the stranger is Keanu Reeves. What happens next will remind the world what real heroism looks like. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning sun hung low over Los Angeles, painting the city in a golden haze that shimmered across windshields and store signs. The 720 Rapid bus rattled down Wilshire Boulevard, packed with the usual mix of tired commuters, students, and workers clutching paper cups of coffee. The hum of the engine and the rhythm of conversation filled the air until a sudden jolt shattered the calm. The driver slammed on the brakes to avoid a jaywalking cyclist. Coffee splashed. A phone clattered to the floor. But the worst came from the middle of the bus. An elderly woman, frail and small, lost her footing. Her cane slipped, her grocery bag tore open, and she fell hard against the metal pole before collapsing to the ground. Her name was Eleanor Whitman, 82 years old. She let out a soft cry, a mixture of shock and pain, as oranges rolled beneath the seats. The driver called out an apology from the front, his voice shaky, but he didn't move. Neither did anyone else. A dozen faces turned for a moment, then drifted back to their screens. The bus rocked gently in the lane, and the world seemed to pause, wrapped in silence and indifference. One woman sighed, muttered about being late. A young man tightened his earbuds. Another passenger raised her phone, thinking about recording, but hesitated. Eleanor tried to sit up, clutching her wrist, but her trembling arms wouldn't cooperate. Her thin gray sweater had slipped from her shoulder. Her breathing was shallow, and her eyes darted helplessly around the bus, searching for anyone willing to help. And then, from the very back, a quiet movement. A man in a gray hoodie stood up. He wore jeans, scuffed boots, and a black backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. No one noticed him before he'd boarded like any other passenger, calm and unassuming. As he began walking down the aisle, the light from the window briefly caught his face. He moved with a steady, almost gentle rhythm. No rush, no panic, just focus. He crouched beside Eleanor, his voice calm and low. "Easy there. Let's take it slow." His hands were steady as he helped her sit up, supporting her shoulders. The bus driver called again from the front, but the man didn't respond. He was focused entirely on her. He gathered her scattered oranges, placing them carefully back into the torn paper bag. Then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and offered it to her to wipe her face. A few passengers finally began to look up for real. Whispers passed between them. "Wait, is that?" someone murmured. The man smiled faintly as Eleanor looked at him for the first time. Her eyes blinked, confusion mixing with recognition. For a long second, she stared into his face, as if piecing together a dream. Her lips parted, trembling slightly. "You're Keanu Reeves," she whispered. Keanu looked almost embarrassed as the name left her lips. The few passengers who heard her fell into stunned silence. A teenager near the front lowered his phone, squinting to make sure he wasn't seeing things. The man in the hoodie, quiet, calm, and unmistakably him, helped Eleanor adjust in her seat. He gave a small smile, barely a lift at the corner of his mouth. "Let's get you comfortable," he said softly. His tone carried no celebrity weight. No trace of fame, only warmth. Eleanor's breathing steadied. Her wrinkled hands gripped his arm for balance. "I saw you in the movies," she murmured, her voice trembling with disbelief. "But I never thought I'd see you like this." Keanu shook his head gently. "Just another passenger today," he replied, pulling the stop cord to signal the driver. Then he reached for her fallen cane, brushing off a faint scratch on its handle before handing it back. The driver looked in the rearview mirror, now fully aware of who was on board. Miss, are you all right? Do we need to stop?" he asked nervously. Keanu answered for her. "She's okay. Just shaken up. I'll stay with her until she feels steady." He took off his gray hoodie, folded it neatly, and placed it behind her lower back to cushion her from the hard seat. The gesture was small, but deeply human. Around them, phones started to rise again, this time recording. The earlier apathy had turned into fascination, but Keanu didn't seem to notice. His focus stayed on Eleanor. He asked her if she needed water, if her wrist still hurt. He listened carefully as she described her late husband and how she still took this same bus route to feel close to the places they used to go. Every word she spoke made the moment feel less like an accident and more like fate. The bus continued down Wilshire, but time seemed to slow. The sound of the city, the horns, the chatter, the hum faded into the background. All that remained was an actor known worldwide for action and silence, showing the kind of heroism that had nothing to do with scripts. Eleanor looked at him again, eyes misting. "My husband always said kindness is the only real fame that lasts," she said. Keanu smiled softly. "He sounds like a wise man." As the bus rolled on, no one returned to their screens. Even the teenagers watched quietly, as if realizing they were witnessing something rare. One man whispered, "You don't see that every day." Keanu glanced up briefly, acknowledging the murmurs but staying humble. When the bus reached the next stop, he gently guided Eleanor off, helping her step down the stairs, one careful step at a time. Outside, the morning light touched them both. A few passengers pressed against the window, watching in silence as the actor everyone admired walked an old woman safely to the bench and waited beside her. The driver lingered at the next stop, glancing nervously through the mirror, as if wanting to say something but not finding the words. The passengers watched through the glass while Keanu helped Eleanor settle onto the bus stop bench. The early sun gleamed across the street, catching the silver in her hair. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she tried to steady her cane, but Keanu gently placed it beside her and crouched so they were eye level. "You sure you're all right?" he asked quietly. His voice was calm, almost tender, as if time itself had slowed to make space for her answer. She nodded, swallowing back tears. "Just a little scared and surprised." He smiled, the kind that seemed to hold patience and sadness at once. "It's okay. Take a breath. You're safe now." A small group had gathered near the sidewalk. They whispered and pointed, unsure if what they were witnessing was real. A few held up their phones, but something about the sincerity of the moment made most of them lower them again. It felt wrong to interrupt something so human. Keanu stood, shielding Eleanor from the glare, and waved for a passing taxi. When one stopped, he helped her in carefully, lifting her grocery bag and ensuring the oranges were tucked neatly back inside. Before closing the door, he leaned in slightly. "Maybe skip the bus for a few days," he said softly. Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "You're a kind man, Mr. Reeves. My husband used to say, your movies made him believe in good people again." He nodded with gratitude. Then he must have been one too. The door shut gently, and the cab pulled away. Keanu stood there for a moment, watching it fade into traffic. The city's noise returned around him, horns, chatter, footsteps. But for him, everything felt still. The kind of stillness that comes after doing something right, not because it's grand, but because it's right. Inside the bus, Miguel, the young student who had caught the fall on camera, finally hit record again. This time, not for a joke or vlog, but out of awe. The image was simple. A man in a hoodie, hands in pockets, walking away from the scene. As the morning light framed him, he didn't know that clip would soon circle the globe. He didn't know that millions would feel something stir inside them when they saw it. All he knew was that, for a few seconds on an ordinary Los Angeles street, Humanity had looked beautiful again. The morning began quietly in Keanu Reeves' modest Los Angeles home, tucked away on a shaded street lined with jacaranda trees. Sunlight slipped through the blinds and painted soft stripes across his workbench. The smell of oil and metal hung in the air. He had spent the last few hours finishing the restoration of a vintage Norton motorcycle, tightening the final bolt with the same patience he brought to every roll and every repair. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back, admiring the gleam of the engine. For most people, it would have been just another machine. But for him, it was a form of meditation, a way to slow the world down. The sound of a well-tuned engine reminded him of rhythm, of peace, of control, in a life that often felt chaotic. But today, he didn't plan to ride. He placed the wrench down, grabbed a gray hoodie from the hook, and slipped it on. He wanted a day where no one asked for pictures or autographs, a day to move through the city like anyone else. Public transportation had always fascinated him. The mix of faces, the unspoken stories, the quiet weight people carried it all, reminded him of how human life looked when stripped of fame. He walked 2 blocks to the nearest bus stop, blending easily into the crowd. No, one gave him a second look. His beard had grown slightly, and the hoodie shadowed his face. When the 720 Rapid bus pulled up, he stepped on, tapping his fare card with a polite nod to the driver. The man behind the wheel, a stocky guy with tired eyes, barely glanced up. The bus was half full, students glued to their screens, office workers clutching travel mugs, a young mother rocking her baby, and a teenager bobbing his head to music through oversized headphones. Keanu found an empty seat near the back and leaned his head against the window. The city outside moved like a slow movie, street vendors, billboards, and early lights spilling over the glass towers downtown. A few blocks away, another story was unfolding. Eleanor Whitman shuffled through her small kitchen in a quiet apartment on the west side. Her morning ritual never changed. Oatmeal with raisins, a cup of chamomile tea, and a soft classical record playing in the background. The photos on her shelf told her life story: her late husband George in a Navy uniform, their wedding day in 1963, their daughter holding a puppy on Christmas morning. She whispered good morning to George's picture before wrapping a scarf around her neck. Today was important. She needed to renew her senior ID at City Hall and then visit George's memorial bench at the library courtyard. It had been 3 years since his passing, but she still made the trip every week, as if keeping that promise held the pieces of her heart together. Eleanor double-checked her bag before leaving: wallet, reading glasses, a small paper envelope containing the fresh flowers she had picked from her balcony garden. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned her coat. She paused by the mirror near her door, gazing at her reflection for a long moment. Her eyes were still kind, but carried a quiet tiredness that only years of loss could carve. Outside, the air was crisp and filled with the hum of morning traffic. The bus stop was just 2 blocks away, past the bakery where she used to meet her husband for coffee every Sunday. The owner still waved whenever she passed, though the visits had grown rarer. She smiled back, clutching her cane tightly as she stepped onto the uneven sidewalk. The 720 Rapid bus arrived right on time, its brakes hissing softly as it came to a halt. The driver greeted her with a nod, and she returned the gesture. Climbing the steps took effort, but she managed, gripping the rail until she reached the middle of the bus. She chose the seat across from the window, the one that gave her the best view of the passing city. The morning rush had filled the bus quickly. A teenage girl in a denim jacket tapped through social media posts. A man in a suit scrolled through business emails. A young couple whispered about a job interview. Every face looked absorbed, connected to somewhere else, someone else, everyone, except her. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap and let the bus rock gently as it turned down the boulevard. She liked watching people. The small acts of life fascinated her. A mother brushing crumbs off her child's coat, a barista waving to a regular through a cafe window, a cyclist racing the lights. It was life, moving forward even when hers felt paused. 2 stops later, Keanu boarded. He didn't draw attention. He never did. His presence carried a quiet steadiness, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. He chose a seat near the back, across from a man humming to himself and next to an empty spot meant for luggage. He looked out the window, his reflection flickering between sunlight and shadow. He thought about his sister, about old friends he hadn't called in months, and about how easy it was for people to forget that small gestures mattered. On the bus, no one cared who he was, and that was what he liked best. Here, fame dissolved into ordinary air. He glanced around the hum of voices, the faint hiss of the air conditioning, the squeak of the brakes, every few blocks. Nothing dramatic, nothing remarkable, just life. And yet, something about the morning felt fragile, as if the world was holding its breath before an unseen moment. The bus rolled east toward downtown, its rhythm steady and hypnotic. The sunlight flickered through the windows, casting shifting patterns across the passengers' faces. The air smelled faintly of coffee, perfume, and city dust. Keanu watched the streets unfold, vendors opening their carts, construction workers waving traffic through cones, a line forming outside a breakfast diner. Every corner seemed to tell its own quiet story. Across the aisle, Eleanor carefully unwrapped her flowers, a small bunch of white lilies tied with a faded blue ribbon. She smiled faintly, lost in memory. George had always brought her lilies on their anniversary. Even after his illness took him, she kept the tradition alive. Her fingers trembled slightly as she brushed the petals, whispering something only she could hear. A few rows ahead, a group of college students laughed over a phone video, their earbuds leaking bits of music. A young man in a work uniform dozed off against the window, his head bobbing with each bump. The driver, an older man named Robert, tapped his steering wheel impatiently as the light turned yellow. His shift had just started, and traffic was already testing his patience. Keanu noticed the tension in the driver's shoulders, the subtle way his jaw clenched. He'd seen that posture before, people weighed down by invisible burdens. Everyone on that bus was carrying something. Regret, exhaustion, fear, hope. He shifted slightly, pulling his hood a little lower. His goal today wasn't to be seen. He just wanted to feel normal, to disappear into the world's ordinary rhythm. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes drawn to the window as the bus passed the library district. For a moment, her face softened. That was where George's memorial bench stood, surrounded by jasmine plants and ivy. She planned to stop there later, sit for a while, and talk to him like she always did. The bus jolted over a rough patch of road. A ripple went through the passengers. Someone cursed under their breath. Another clutched their drink. Robert muttered something about city maintenance. The light ahead flickered from green to yellow, but instead of slowing, he pressed the pedal, trying to make it through before it turned red. The tires hissed against the asphalt. A cyclist darted out from a side street. In that split second, everything that had felt routine shattered. The driver hit the brakes, and the world inside the bus lurched forward. No one realized it yet, but the ordinary morning had just become unforgettable. The bus swerved suddenly to avoid the cyclist who had darted into the intersection. Tires screeched against the asphalt. The sound cut through the air like a warning. Passengers lurched forward, bags and phones tumbling from laps. The sharp jolt threw the bus into a brief silence, followed by startled gasps. Eleanor clutched the metal pole beside her seat, but her hand slipped. Her cane slid from her grasp, clattering across the floor. The grocery bag she had balanced on her knees tore open, and oranges rolled like marbles down the aisle. In that instant, her balance gave way. She fell forward with a soft cry, striking her wrist against the hard floor. The driver's voice came from the front. Sorry about that." He sounded shaken, but he didn't leave his seat. The light ahead turned red, and the bus jerked to a full stop, rocking everyone once more. A few passengers looked up from their phones, murmured something under their breath, then turned away. Only one person didn't. Near the back, Keanu lifted his head instantly. His eyes darted toward the sound of the fall. Without hesitation, he rose from his seat and moved through the narrow aisle. The motion was steady, unhurried, but filled with quiet urgency. A college student named Miguel sat a few rows away, holding up his phone to record his daily vlog. The camera was still rolling, capturing the chaos by accident. His cheerful narration turned into a startled exclamation. "Whoa, what just happened?" The image on his screen showed an elderly woman crumpled on the floor and a man in a hoodie moving toward her. The focus wasn't clear yet. No one could tell who he was. Eleanor groaned softly as she tried to sit up. Her wrist throbbed, and the floor felt cold beneath her palm. Her groceries scattered under the seats, one orange bumping against a woman's shoe. But the woman didn't move. She just watched, expression blank. Then a pair of hands appeared beside Eleanor. Large, steady, and gentle. Keanu crouched beside her, his voice low and calm. "Don't rush. Let's take it slow. Can you move your fingers?" She blinked, dazed. I think so." He tested her wrist lightly, careful not to cause pain. "Good. Doesn't feel broken. Let's get you up." He slipped one arm behind her shoulders and the other under her elbow, helping her rise to her knees. The bus rocked again as traffic resumed, but his grip held firm. Her cane was still on the floor, so he reached for it, then picked up each orange that had rolled away. The sound of them thudding back into the torn paper bag echoed in the stillness. Every move he made carried intention, respect, and grace. Eleanor's breathing came in shallow bursts. She pressed her good hand against her chest, embarrassed by the attention. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, though no one had accused her of anything. Her cheeks flushed pink, her voice trembling like fragile glass. Keanu knelt beside her, still calm. "You don't need to apologize," he said softly. "You just got surprised, that's all." His voice carried the same gentleness one might use with a child who's been startled awake. He guided her carefully toward an empty seat, helping her settle in. The driver glanced back again through the mirror, but didn't move. His hand stayed locked on the steering wheel, as if stepping away would be an admission of guilt. The passengers shifted uneasily. A woman holding a coffee cup muttered something about being late. A teenage boy lowered his headphones, unsure whether to stand. No one did. The bus resumed its motion, rumbling through the next intersection. And yet, inside, it felt like time had stalled. Keanu crouched again to gather the rest of Eleanor's groceries. Each orange that had rolled away was retrieved, one by one. The bag was torn nearly in half, so he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small reusable cloth bag he carried for errands. "Here," he said. "This should hold better." Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Thank you, young man." "It's all right. I've fallen before too," he said, with a light chuckle. The small attempt at humor made her smile, if only faintly. Her fingers trembled as she reached for his sleeve, as if to make sure he was real. There was something about his calm that steadied her. Even as the pain pulsed through her wrist, a faint whisper rippled from the back of the bus. Someone finally recognized him. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" Another voice murmured, low but excited. Heads turned subtly, eyes widening as if they couldn't trust their own sight. Miguel, the college student, lowered his camera slightly, stunned. His lens caught the reflection of Keanu's face in the window, recognizable, serene, and utterly unfazed by the attention. He wasn't posing or performing. He didn't even glance toward the camera. Instead, he looked at Eleanor with genuine concern. "Can you bend your wrist like this?" he asked gently, demonstrating with his own hand. She mimicked the motion and winced, but nodded. "It hurts a bit," she admitted. "Let's keep it still then," he said. He removed the drawstring from his hoodie, folded part of the torn paper bag into a small pad, and tied it loosely around her wrist like a soft brace. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep her comfortable until she got home. Eleanor watched him work with quiet amazement. "You're very kind," she said softly. "Most people wouldn't bother." Keanu smiled faintly, his tone humble. "Most people just need a reminder." Around them, the rest of the passengers stayed silent. The hum of the engine filled the space where guilt once sat. The bus rolled onward, its tires humming over the uneven asphalt. The usual chatter was gone. Everyone seemed to sense that something significant had just happened, though no one could quite explain why. The air inside felt heavier, thick with quiet awareness. Eleanor flexed her fingers gently, wincing but managing a smile. "You must do this kind of thing often," she said softly. "Helping strangers, I mean." Keanu sat across from her now, leaning slightly forward, elbows on his knees. "Not as often as I should," he replied. "But when I can, I try." The way he said it calm, without pride, made something in her chest loosen. She laughed under her breath, wiping at her eyes. "I wish the world had more people like you." For a moment, there was only the sound of the city rushing by outside. The sunlight flashed between buildings, scattering across the windows. Miguel kept his camera low, pretending to check settings, but his recording continued. He zoomed in slightly, catching the way Keanu's hands rested still. His eyes focused entirely on Eleanor, as though the rest of the world had faded away. The driver finally spoke again. "Everything okay back there?" His voice cracked over the intercom. Keanu glanced toward the front. "She's all right," he said. "Just a little shaken up." "Good," the driver muttered, his relief audible. The bus lurched again, taking a sharp turn that made everyone grip their seats tighter. Eleanor reached for her cane, resting it against her lap. "I've been riding this route for years," she murmured. "George, my late husband, used to meet me halfway downtown. We'd have lunch near the library." Keanu listened, nodding gently. "That sounds nice." "It was," she said, smiling faintly. "He used to say that kindness was like a seat on a bus. You don't lose anything by giving it up." Keanu looked down, his smile quiet, thoughtful. He was right. The bus slowed near a traffic light, sunlight cutting through the windows and illuminating the two of them. Eleanor turned her head slightly, eyes glistening as she studied his face again. "You know," she whispered, voice filled with wonder, "you look so much like Keanu Reeves." A few passengers chuckled softly. Keanu gave a modest grin. "I get that sometimes." But when their eyes met again, she knew. Her lips parted in surprise. The man who had helped her wasn't just kind, he was real. Her breath caught. You really are him." Keanu simply nodded, the corners of his eyes softening. "Just glad I was here." Eleanor's hand trembled as she held onto her cane, her eyes never leaving the man sitting across from her. The sunlight flickered through the windows, catching the faint streaks of gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes. Something familiar lived in those eyes, a calm that felt strangely cinematic, the same quiet presence she'd seen so many times before, only now it wasn't through a screen. Her lips parted slightly. "You're Keanu Reeves," she whispered, the words breaking the silence like a prayer. Keanu's response came with a soft chuckle, humble and light. "Just another passenger today," he said. His tone wasn't defensive, just sincere, as if he really believed that. But Eleanor shook her head, her eyes moistening. No, you're him. My husband and I. We used to watch your movies every Friday night." Her voice cracked gently, the memory blooming in her mind. "He loved the way you always played good men who tried, even when the world was cruel." Keanu smiled, though his eyes carried something deeper, an understanding that went beyond polite gratitude. "That means a lot," he said softly. "Sounds like your husband had good taste in stories." "He did," she said, nodding faintly. "We watched The Lake House on our anniversary every year. He'd say it reminded him of us different times, different places, but always finding our way back. Her words hit him quietly, like a gentle wave of warmth and sorrow. He leaned slightly forward. "That's a beautiful memory," he said. "I'm honored you shared that with me." The bus was quieter now. The usual hum of conversation had faded into a respectful hush. People stared over their screens, their curiosity tempered by the tenderness of the moment. A young woman, sitting a few rows away, discreetly lifted her phone and began recording. Not out of malice, but wonder. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her purse. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, half to herself. He would have laughed if he saw this. He always said if we ever met you, he'd ask what kept you so kind in such an unkind world. Keanu paused, thinking before he spoke. "Maybe it's the same thing that keeps anyone kind," he said. "Loss, gratitude, remembering what it's like to need someone else's hand." A silence followed, soft, meaningful. Eleanor's gaze dropped to her lap, where her hand rested over her purse. Her fingers trembled less now. She looked up again, her voice quiet but steady. "You helped me today, just like you did in those stories. Only this time, it's real." Keanu looked down for a moment, his hands folded loosely between his knees. "I'm glad I could help," he said softly. "That's all anyone really wants, to be useful when it counts." His words carried no grandness, just quiet truth. Eleanor smiled faintly, her tears now replaced by warmth. "You know," she said, "when George was sick, we'd sit on the couch and watch your films just to feel hopeful again. He said your characters always got back up, no matter how many times they fell." He nodded slowly, his eyes distant for a heartbeat, as if her words had stirred something buried deep inside. "That's not just acting," he said quietly. "That's life. We all fall." Her wrinkled hands tightened on her cane, her voice trembling. He was a good man. Cancer took him too soon, but he never stopped believing in people. He used to tell me, "There's still goodness out there. Ellie, you just have to look for it." Keanu smiled gently. "Sounds like he was right. You found some today." That line made her laugh through her tears. The sound was fragile, but real, like sunlight breaking through clouds. A few passengers around them smiled too, the emotion spreading through the bus like ripples in water. From the corner, Miguel, the young college student, watched, still holding his phone in disbelief. He wasn't filming now. He simply sat there, frozen. His earlier cynicism washed away. He had boarded that bus planning to film a joke for his vlog. But what he saw instead was something raw and human. The woman across the aisle leaned closer to her friend, whispering, "He's really talking to her, like they've known each other for years." Keanu turned slightly, sensing the growing attention, but his focus remained on Eleanor. "Where were you heading today?" he asked, his voice calm and genuine. She smiled through the ache in her wrist. "Downtown, to renew my senior ID and visit my husband's bench by the library. I go every week. Talk to him for a while." He nodded. "That's a good tradition. Keeps him close." Her eyes softened. "Do you visit anyone?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, then exhaled. "Sometimes. I visit the places that remind me of the people I lost. I don't always bring flowers. Sometimes I just sit. Feels like that's enough." Eleanor's eyes welled again, not from sadness, but from connection. "That's enough," she echoed, her voice trembling slightly. The bus hit another small bump, but this time, no one looked away or complained. The air was different, softer, almost reverent. Keanu leaned back in his seat, his expression quiet. "You know," he said, "most people rush through days like this. But every once in a while, the world makes you stop, gives you a reason to look around." Eleanor smiled gently. Maybe today was one of those reasons. The bus slowed at a red light, and for a brief moment, the sunlight poured through the front windows, casting a warm glow across the aisle. It felt almost sacred, the way it touched their faces, an old woman and a movie star, bound not by fame, but by humanity. Eleanor looked out the window, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "You know," she said softly, "George used to tell me that kindness doesn't need an audience. He'd say it was like a candle. You light it, even when no one's watching." Keanu smiled quietly. "Your husband sounds like a philosopher." "He was just a mailman," she said proudly. "But he noticed things. People who smiled even when their hands were tired. Kids who shared lunches at the stop. He said kindness keeps the world turning." Keanu looked at her for a long second. He was right. The world doesn't change because of speeches. It changes because someone decides to care when it's inconvenient. The woman across the aisle lowered her phone, suddenly realizing she'd grown to do it. Been recording again. Something in his words made her pause. She pressed stop, her hand trembling slightly. Around the bus, eyes softened, heads nodded. No one dared speak. Eleanor turned back to him. "You've probably met so many people, done so many things. Don't you ever get tired of being good?" He shook his head, smiling faintly. "You can't get tired of something that feels right. And the truth is, most days I don't feel famous. I just feel grateful I can still walk into a room and maybe leave it a little better." Her eyes shimmered again, but this time with joy. "George would have liked you," she said. "I think I'd have liked him too," he replied softly. The light turned green and the bus continued on. Outside, Los Angeles moved in its usual hurry. Honking horns, flashing billboards, impatient crowds. But inside, it felt like another world. A bubble of stillness. A rare moment when fame, grief, and ordinary life met at the same crossroad. Eleanor leaned back against the seat, her body still weak, but her spirit lifted. She smiled faintly and whispered, "You gave me a story to tell him when I visit the bench today." Keanu looked at her, eyes kind. "Then tell him we said hello." Her laughter, fragile but full of warmth, echoed softly as the bus rolled on, carrying them toward a day neither of them would ever forget. The bus rolled through downtown Los Angeles, its steady hum filling the silence that lingered after Eleanor's laughter faded. Outside, the city pulsed with motion, streets alive with honking cars, flashing lights, and morning commuters. But inside, time seemed to slow. Eleanor adjusted her seat slightly, still holding her cane, and glanced toward Keanu. "You must get tired of people staring at you," she said softly, a shy curiosity in her tone. Keanu smiled, shaking his head. "Not really. I think most people are just curious. They see someone from a screen and forget we all live the same kind of days. Same struggles. Same small joys." She nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose fame doesn't change that." He chuckled quietly. "Not really. It just makes the quiet moments harder to find." Eleanor smiled faintly, her gaze drifting toward the window. "Quiet moments," she repeated. "Those are rare now. Ever since George passed, the house has been too quiet. I leave the TV on sometimes, just to hear another voice." Keanu's expression softened. "I'm sorry," he said. "That kind of silence can be heavy." "It is," she admitted. "He was my whole world. We did everything together. Groceries, walks, movies, even arguments. After he was gone, it felt like time stopped in the house. Every clock still ticks, but it doesn't feel like it's moving forward." Keanu looked down for a moment, the memory of his own losses flickering behind his eyes. "I know what that feels like," he said quietly. "Losing people who mattered more than anything. You think you'll get used to it, but you never really do. You just learn to keep walking." Eleanor studied his face, seeing not the actor, but the man. "You've lost someone too," she said softly. He nodded slowly. "A few people. My father, my best friend, and someone I loved very much." I used to think I'd never stop carrying that weight, but then I started to notice how strangers helped me without even knowing it. A kind word, a smile, a stranger holding the door open. It reminded me that not everything is gone, that life still offers small mercies. Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "Most people rush past those moments." He smiled gently. "You didn't rush today. You noticed me before you even knew who I was." She laughed softly. "I just saw someone kind enough to help an old woman off the floor. That's all I needed to know." The bus rumbled on, passing through another block. Passengers who had been pretending not to listen began to glance up, drawn into the quiet rhythm of their conversation. Eleanor leaned her cane against the seat and rested her hands on her lap. "You know," she said softly, "people always tell you to move on after someone dies, but they never tell you how." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's because there isn't one way. Grief doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't keep time. It just lives with you until it starts to soften." She turned her head toward him, her eyes searching his face. "Does it ever stop hurting?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I don't think it stops. It just changes shape. It goes from being something that crushes you to something that walks beside you." Her gaze lowered to her hands, and she smiled sadly. "I like that. Walking beside me. Maybe George is doing that now." Keanu smiled gently. "Maybe he is." The bus made another stop, and a few passengers got off. The noise of the doors opening broke the spell for a moment. But even as new passengers climbed aboard, the energy stayed calm. No one spoke loudly. It was as though the whole bus had fallen under the same quiet reflection. Eleanor's eyes were distant, as if she were seeing another time. "We were married for 51 years, she said softly. "He wasn't rich or famous, but he was good. The kind of man who remembered my favorite, flowers, and never forgot our anniversaries. Every Friday, he'd come home with a movie and 2 slices of cheesecake. That was our date night, no matter what." Keanu smiled faintly, the image touching something inside him. "That sounds like love done right." "And when he got sick, he kept apologizing for leaving me alone. I told him I'd be fine. I lied." He met her eyes, his own, full of quiet understanding. "Sometimes, lying is the kindest thing you can do for someone you love." Her eyes glistened again. "And you? You said you've lost people too. How do you live with it?" He leaned back, his hands clasped loosely. "I remind myself that I was lucky to have them in the first place. Every person we love changes us. Even when they're gone, what they gave us stays." Eleanor smiled weakly. "You sound like you've made peace with it." He looked out the window for a long moment. "Some days I have," he said softly. "Other days, I'm still learning." The bus rolled on, its passengers silent now. A young woman quietly turned off her music. A man in a suit closed his laptop. Even the driver seemed to slow down, listening. For a fleeting moment, everyone shared the same stillness, as if the city outside had stopped breathing. The light outside shifted as the bus turned onto a wider street, the late morning sun filtering through the windows in streaks of gold. Eleanor sat quietly, her eyes tracing the sunlight on the floor. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "When you lose someone, people send flowers, cards, messages. But after a few months, it all stops. Everyone moves on, but you're still living inside the echo. You just learn to listen to it differently." She gave him a long look. "You sound like someone who's lived a lot of lifetimes in one." He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Maybe, but I think we all do in our own way." He paused, glancing out the window as the bus passed a mural painted on a building wall, a pair of hands releasing a dove into the sky. "You ever notice how grief and love feel the same sometimes? They both pull at you from the inside, Eleanor's eyes softened. "Yes," she whispered. "Love doesn't end. It just changes its address." The passengers nearby exchanged glances, the simple truth of her words lingering in the air. A man near the back closed his eyes, as if remembering someone he'd lost. Even the steady hum of the bus seemed quieter. Keanu looked back at her, his voice calm, but weighted with meaning. "You're right. Love doesn't leave. It just teaches us to keep giving it away." She smiled, her expression serene now, the pain in her face easing into peace. "Seems like you've been carrying something heavy too," she said gently. He hesitated before answering, his tone low. "I used to think grief made me smaller, but now I know it just made more room inside for compassion." Her hand reached out slowly, resting on his for a brief moment. "You've used that compassion well," she said softly. "Not many would stop to help like you did." He squeezed her hand lightly, humbled. We all need each other more than we admit. The bus neared another stop, the world outside alive again with movement, bicycles, crosswalks, distant laughter, but inside, no one moved. For a few fragile minutes, strangers had become witnesses to something sacred. Two souls from different worlds, finding solace in shared humanity. When the doors opened and sunlight spilled in, the world felt a little less hurried and a little more kind. When the bus finally reached downtown Los Angeles, the passengers stepped off slowly, each carrying an invisible weight that hadn't been there before. Miguel lingered on the sidewalk, holding his phone in his hand, replaying the footage he'd captured without meaning to. The video was less than a minute long, just a shaky clip of an elderly woman falling and a man in a gray hoodie helping her up. But the image of that man's calm, gentle presence stood out. He zoomed in on the still frame. The hoodie's hood had slipped slightly, revealing the unmistakable face of Keanu Reeves. Miguel blinked twice, his heart pounding. He hadn't even realized it during the moment. He had filmed something extraordinary without knowing. He hesitated for a long time. Part of him felt it was too personal to share, too genuine to exploit. But another part of him felt people needed to see it, to remember that real kindness existed. After a few minutes of pacing near the bus stop, he opened his social media app, uploaded the clip, and typed the caption that came to him instinctively. "A hero doesn't need action scenes, just a chair." He hit post and slipped the phone into his pocket, not thinking much more of it. By the time Miguel got home to his small apartment in East LA, his notifications were already piling up. Dozens of likes, then hundreds, then thousands. Comments started flooding in, each more emotional than the last. Faith in humanity restored. Keanu Reeves doing what Keanu Reeves does, being a real-life angel. Why does kindness look so rare and yet so beautiful? Within 2 hours, the clip had been shared on multiple platforms. News outlets began picking it up. Local reporters tagged Miguel, asking for permission to use the video. He sat on his couch, stunned, watching the numbers rise in real time. Meanwhile, miles away, Keanu had no idea. After getting off the bus, he had spent the rest of his morning visiting a children's hospital, as he often did quietly. He brought books, signed posters, and new art supplies for the kids' creative therapy sessions. The nurses greeted him warmly. He'd become almost part of the family there, showing up without announcements or cameras, just bringing warmth and laughter. One nurse, Julia, asked with a smile, "Did you take the bike today?" He shook his head. "No, the bus. It was a good ride." She laughed softly. "Only you would say that about LA traffic." He smiled faintly. "You see a lot on the bus. It keeps you honest." By noon, the video had reached every corner of the internet. News outlets began cutting segments around it, pairing the footage with soft piano music and bold headlines. Keanu Reeves offers seat to elderly woman on bus, proves once again why he's Hollywood's kindest star. Television hosts debated it, social commentators analyzed it, and thousands of viewers shared their own stories of kindness. In response, a new hashtag began trending, number hero in a hoodie. Under it, strangers posted short clips of themselves helping others, inspired by what they'd seen. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was a movement, born from one simple act. Miguel couldn't believe what was happening. His phone buzzed non-stop, notifications flooding every few seconds. People from around the world messaged him. One comment read, "I cried watching this. This world still has good people." Another said, "He didn't even do it for the cameras. That's what makes it powerful." Miguel stared at the screen, humbled. He hadn't meant to create a phenomenon, but the message had spread faster than he could have dreamed. Still, part of him worried, would Keanu be upset that the private moment had become public? Meanwhile, Keanu stood in a brightly lit hospital room, helping a small boy adjust the band on his toy astronaut helmet. The boy's name was Carter, 8 years old, recovering from leukemia. "You look ready for space," Keanu said, smiling. Carter grinned. "When I get better, I'm gonna fly one day, maybe even meet aliens." Keanu chuckled softly. "If you do, tell them Earth's not so bad." The nurses smiled, whispering quietly about how he always seemed to bring calm wherever he went. For Keanu, it wasn't charity or duty. It was peace. Each visit reminded him what mattered most: being present, being kind, being human. After spending a few hours in the ward, he made his way down to the hospital courtyard. The sun was lowering, painting the sky with orange and pink. He sat for a while on a bench beneath a jacaranda tree, the faint scent of the flowers mixing with the sound of children laughing in the distance. He pulled out his phone briefly to check messages, nothing unusual. No calls from his team, no news alerts, just the quiet hum of the world moving on. He smiled faintly, pocketed the phone, and leaned back, content. Across the internet, millions were still watching that 1-minute clip, seeing the same man in a different light. While the world turned him into a symbol, he remained simply himself, still humble and unaware that his small act of decency had become a mirror reflecting what everyone longed to believe again. As the afternoon deepened, the video continued to soar through every major platform. On television, morning anchors replayed the moment in slow motion, narrating it like a scene from a film. The clip showed Eleanor's fall, Keanu's quick movement to help, and his faint smile as she looked up in disbelief. Then came the still frame the moment their eyes met. That image, tender and unscripted, became the defining photo of the day. In newsrooms across the country, editors scrambled to find the source. Articles appeared with titles like "The Day," "Keanu Reeves reminded us what humanity looks like," and "A Chair, a Star, and a Lesson We Needed." Some networks invited psychologists to discuss why the simple act resonated so deeply with people. One commentator said, "In a time when fame often overshadows sincerity, this moment felt pure. It wasn't for the camera. That's why it hit home." On social media, the numbers climbed past 10 million views, then 20. The caption, "A hero doesn't need action scenes. Just a chair," was quoted in headlines, printed on t-shirts, and turned into artwork by online illustrators. Fan accounts flooded timelines with edits of Keanu's past kindnesses, creating compilations of his quiet generosity through the years. It was no longer just a story about one morning in Los Angeles. It had become a movement about decency itself. Miguel sat in disbelief, staring at his phone as messages from journalists filled his inbox. Some asked for interviews, others wanted to verify the authenticity of the video. Friends called, cheering him on. His mother, watching the evening news, phoned him in tears. "You showed people something good, mijo," she said. "That's a blessing." But Miguel wasn't celebrating. A small worry sat heavy in his chest. What if Keanu didn't want this shared? What if he had ruined something that was meant to stay private? He decided he'd write a long post later that night, explaining his intentions that he'd only wanted people to see what kindness looked like when no one expected it. As the digital world buzzed, Keanu's evening remained quiet. He left the hospital just before sunset, carrying a stack of children's drawings, a rocket ship, a superhero, a smiling stick figure labeled Mr. K. He waved goodbye to the nurses and made his way toward the parking lot. The sky above was painted in streaks of lavender and gold. He stopped briefly at a food truck parked outside and ordered a black coffee. The man behind the counter, unaware of the viral frenzy, handed it to him with a smile. "Rough day?" he asked casually. Keanu smiled back. "No, actually, a pretty good one." He sat on the curb, sipping his coffee slowly, watching cars stream by. He thought about Eleanor, the tremor in her hands, the strength in her spirit, the way she smiled through pain. He hoped she made it home safely. He didn't know that her image, too, was now spreading across the world beside his own. Somewhere downtown, a billboard that once advertised a new movie had been replaced by a fan-made tribute circulating online. A digital poster showing a bus seat bathed in sunlight with the words, "Kindness is the real stardom." That night, as the city glowed under streetlights, millions fell asleep having seen the clip. Parents showed it to their children. Teachers used it in classrooms. For one fleeting day, social media wasn't about outrage or gossip. It was about decency. And while the world talked about him, Keanu sat in peaceful silence, unaware that a small act of compassion had reignited something rare, the belief that goodness still had power. By sunrise the next morning, the internet had exploded with opinions. News outlets replayed the clip on endless loops, while social media platforms turned the moment into a worldwide discussion. Some called it proof that goodness still existed in a world of cynicism. Others, more skeptical, claimed the video had to be staged. Hashtags dominated the morning feed. Number bus hero, number kindness matters, number Keanu on the bus. Influencers posted reaction videos. Radio hosts debated what it meant for celebrities to act like regular people. The clip was everywhere, on TV screens in cafes, on giant LED billboards in Times Square, and even projected during morning assemblies in schools. At the heart of all that noise sat one still image. Keanu crouched beside Eleanor, helping her to her feet. His face was calm, almost serene, while hers was filled with shock and gratitude. It became the image of compassion for millions who were desperate to see something hopeful in the world again. Among those who stumbled across it that morning was Sophie Whitman, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher in Portland, Oregon. She had just finished grading papers when a fellow teacher sent her the clip with a simple message. "Isn't this your grandma?" She clicked the link absent-mindedly and froze. The face on the screen was unmistakable. The thin gray hair, the floral sweater, the gentle way she held her cane. "Oh my God," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. It was her grandmother. Tears filled her eyes as she watched the clip again, this time slower. Seeing her grandmother fall made her heart clench, but seeing Keanu Reeves kneel beside her, speaking to her with such care, filled her with something else entirely: pride, disbelief, and awe. She replayed the video over and over, pressing her hand to her mouth. "That's Grandma Eleanor," she said aloud. "That's really her." Without hesitation, Sophie grabbed her phone and dialed her grandmother's number. It rang several times before. Eleanor answered with her usual warmth. "Good morning, dear. Is everything all right?" "Grandma, you're on the news," Sophie said breathlessly. Eleanor laughed softly. "Oh, honey. What are you talking about? There's a video of you on the bus yesterday with Keanu Reeves. The whole world's talking about it." There was a long pause. Eleanor's gentle chuckle returned, uncertain but kind. "Oh my, that nice man? I didn't even know anyone was filming." "Well, they were," Sophie said, wiping her tears. And people are calling you a symbol of kindness and grace. Grandma, you've gone viral. Eleanor laughed again, still not quite believing it. At my age, that's a strange thing to hear. By midday, Eleanor's face was everywhere. Major talk shows opened with slow-motion clips of her and Keanu on the bus, accompanied by gentle piano music, and the headline, "Hollywood Star Shows True Class." Hosts praised the humility of the act. One morning anchor said, "You can tell it wasn't for attention. Look at how genuine that smile is." Segments aired across the country, each with commentators dissecting what made the video so moving. Some spoke about celebrity culture losing its humanity, others about society's hunger for small acts of good. A viral tweet read, "In a world obsessed with fame, the kindest man in Hollywood reminds us that being human is enough." Online threads began arguing over whether the moment had been staged. A few critics claimed it was a publicity stunt, citing the camera angle and perfect timing. "No one just happens to record something like that," one user wrote. Others quickly defended Keanu, reminding them of his decades-long reputation for humility. "You can't fake 30 years of being genuine," one reply read. "If you think this was planned, you haven't been paying attention." Meanwhile, in Portland, Sophie's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews with her grandmother. She tried to protect Eleanor's peace, turning down every request. "She's not interested in fame," Sophie told them gently. "She's just happy someone helped her." That same afternoon, Keanu's team began receiving calls too. His assistant, Jordan, walked briskly into his office, laptop in hand. "You might want to see this," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Jordan turned the screen toward him. The video filled the display the same shaky footage Miguel had posted less than 24 hours ago. It showed him helping Eleanor, their short exchange. Her realization of who he was, and the caption that had already become iconic. "A hero doesn't need action scenes. Just a chair." Keanu watched in silence. The video played twice before he looked up. "Wow," he said softly. "That's everywhere now?" "Everywhere," Jordan replied. "It's trending in 23 countries. Every outlet wants a statement or an interview. Some are calling it the moment that restored faith in humanity." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I didn't even know someone was filming." "I figured," she said, "but we should probably respond. The PR team suggesting you go on a late-night show, maybe talk about the meaning of kindness. It could be good press." Keanu smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No interviews," he said simply. "Let the act speak for itself." Jordan exhaled but smiled. "I thought you'd say that." He stood, walking toward the window where the afternoon light poured in. Outside, Los Angeles moved as it always did, fast, distracted, alive. "If one small thing makes people remember to care," he said quietly, "then that's enough." That evening, Keanu's refusal to give interviews only deepened the world's fascination. Entertainment channels praised his decision, calling it the ultimate proof of sincerity. News anchors repeated his quiet response, "No interview. Let the act speak for itself." The quote was shared more than 1 million times within hours. Miguel, the college student who filmed the moment, received hundreds of messages too. When a local news station offered him a small payment for rights to the clip, he accepted, but only on one condition. "Make sure the story stays about her," he said. "Not about me." True to his word, every major article mentioned Eleanor by name. Eleanor Whitman, 82, was helped by actor Keanu Reeves after a fall on a Los Angeles bus. The photo of her smile, taken from the video, became as widely recognized as Keanu's. People from across the world sent letters and emails to the news station asking to contact her, many writing how she reminded them of their own mothers or grandmothers. Back in Portland, Sophie printed out one of the articles and called Eleanor again. "Grandma, do you know you're famous now?" she teased gently. Eleanor laughed, still in disbelief. "Oh dear. I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to make it home in one piece." "Well," Sophie said warmly, "you did more than that. You made the world a little softer today." The older woman paused, her voice tender. Then maybe George was right. He always said kindness finds its way home. Meanwhile, talk shows continued to replay the clip, dissecting every second. On one evening program, a guest psychologist explained, "We're starving for decency." People saw in that moment what they miss in everyday life: attention, respect, empathy. Another host added, "He didn't make a speech, didn't promote a cause. He just acted." By nightfall, Number Bus Hero had surpassed 50 million mentions worldwide. Artists drew portraits of Eleanor and Keanu together. Poets wrote verses inspired by the act. Teachers showed the video to their students as a lesson in compassion. And through it all, Keanu stayed quiet. No press conference, no statement, no social media post. Just a quiet man going about his life, unaware that a simple choice to stand up for one woman had, somehow, made the whole world stop and listen. 2 days after the video had gone viral, Eleanor Whitman was still blissfully unaware of the global phenomenon she had inspired. Her small apartment remained as quiet and orderly as ever. The only sound came from the soft hum of her old radio and the ticking clock on the wall. She spent the morning as she always did, watering her plants, making oatmeal, and humming faintly to the music of the 40s. Then came a knock at the door. It was her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Clark, a lively woman in her 60s who always carried a tablet everywhere she went. She was grinning from ear to ear. "Eleanor," she said, holding the device close to her chest, "you need to see something." Eleanor chuckled. "Goodness, what's gotten into you?" Mrs. Clark tapped the screen and turned it around. "You're famous." On the tablet played the video, the fall, the helping hands, and Keanu's gentle smile as he guided her to her seat. The words beneath it read, "A hero doesn't need action scenes, just a chair." The video had millions of views. Eleanor's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her heart. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered. "That's me." Her neighbor laughed softly. "That's you and Keanu Reeves. You two broke the internet." Eleanor watched, breath held, as the clip replayed. The sight of herself stumbling was embarrassing. But what followed wasn't shame, it was wonder. She watched Keanu's face again. The way he moved without hesitation. The way he spoke to her as if she mattered. When the short video ended, she simply stared at the screen, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. She reread the caption 3 times, mouthing the words to herself. A hero doesn't need action scenes. Just a chair. It wasn't vanity that made her cry. It was hope. She had spent years believing the world had grown cold. People rushed past one another, eyes glued to phones, hearts closed off. But now, as she read the thousands of comments, strangers sending love, sharing stories of their own grandparents, thanking her for reminding them to be kind, something stirred inside her chest. Mrs. Clark smiled knowingly. "It's quite something, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded, her voice trembling. "It's beautiful. All this time, I thought kindness had gone missing, but maybe it just needed someone to notice." The tablet pinged again, another update, another article featuring her photo. She shook her head, overwhelmed, but oddly peaceful. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "I never wanted to be on television, let alone the internet." Her neighbor patted her shoulder. "Maybe it's not about being seen, dear. Maybe it's about being remembered for something good." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Yes," she said softly. "That feels right." That afternoon, Eleanor's phone began to ring non-stop. The first few calls were from friends who had seen her on television, their voices bursting with excitement. "Ellie, you're a celebrity now." One of them laughed. Another said, "They're calling you the grandmother who reminded the world to care." She smiled. though she barely understood what going viral meant. "I didn't remind anyone," she said softly. "He did. I just happened to fall." After the 5th call, she stopped answering altogether. The attention was overwhelming. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat near the window, gazing at the city below. The morning light reflected off the rooftops, the same as it always had. Yet something inside her felt different, lighter, fuller. The thought of that day on the bus replayed again and again in her mind. The sound of the brakes screeching, the shock of the floor beneath her hands, the sudden quiet, and then his voice, calm, patient, and kind. She reached for the small wooden box on her coffee table, where she kept letters, postcards, and trinkets from George. Among them was a faded photo of the two of them sitting on a park bench, smiling at the camera, their hands clasped tightly. She brushed her thumb over his face and whispered, "You were right, George. There's still goodness in this world." Her eyes filled again, not with sadness, but gratitude. She realized she didn't want interviews or cameras. What she wanted was to say thank you to the man who had treated her with dignity when no one else had moved. She pulled out a piece of stationery and her favorite fountain pen, the same one she used to write birthday cards to her late husband. She sat for a moment, collecting her thoughts, then began to write. To the man on the bus, "You probably don't remember much about that day, but I will remember it for the rest of my life. You helped me when everyone else looked away. You made me feel seen in a world that often forgets people my age exist. You didn't ask for thanks or attention, yet you gave me both without realizing it. I saw the video online today. Millions of people did. They called you a hero. But to me, you were just a kind man who offered a hand and a chair. That's all it took to make me believe again in the world my husband used to love so much. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still lives quietly among us. Thank you for treating me like I mattered. With all my heart, Eleanor Whitman." When she finished, she folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it simply, "To the man on the bus." Beneath that, she wrote the only destination she knew, Keanu Reeves, C.O. Archway Pictures, Los Angeles, California. The next morning, she walked to the small mailbox at the corner of her street. The letter felt almost alive in her hands, like a final secret she was sending out into the world. She slid it through the slot and whispered a small prayer. "Wherever you are," she said softly, "I hope this finds you." Then she smiled and walked home under the morning sun, unaware that the letter she had just mailed would soon find its way into the hands of the man who had changed her life with a single act of grace. 3 weeks passed before the letter made its quiet journey across Los Angeles. It was placed into a stack of ordinary envelopes, fan mail, charity requests, thank you cards waiting in a corner office at Archway Pictures, Keanu's production studio. Most of the mail never reached him directly. Assistants screened it, organized it, and passed along only the most personal or meaningful ones. That morning, a studio assistant named Lydia Ramos sat at her desk, sorting through dozens of envelopes. Most were typed, flashy, or filled with glossy photos. But one caught her attention immediately. It was written on cream-colored stationery, with delicate cursive handwriting that looked like it came from another era. The return address was simple: E. Whitman, Los Angeles, California. Something about the steadiness of the script and the faint lavender scent on the paper made her pause. She opened it carefully and began to read. Her eyes softened as she reached the middle of the letter, by the pen, and she felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't just a thank you note, it was a story of gratitude, loss, and rediscovered faith in humanity. Lydia sat for a long moment, then made a decision. She walked down the hallway toward Keanu's office. When she entered, he was reviewing script notes. She waited until he looked up, then held out the envelope. "You should read this one," she said quietly. It's special. He nodded, taking it from her with a faint smile. Thanks, Lydia. After she left, Keanu set his papers aside and turned the envelope over in his hands. The handwriting had the kind of care that only comes from someone who grew up writing letters by hand. He opened it gently, unfolding the single sheet within. The first line stopped him cold. To the man on the bus. He read every word slowly, his eyes tracing each curve of ink. The sentences carried warmth, sincerity, and the kind of truth that only a lifetime could teach. She spoke of loneliness, of missing her husband, and of how that brief moment his quiet kindness had restored her faith in people. That day, you didn't just help me up, the letter read. You helped me remember that kindness is still alive. He sat back in his chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. For several minutes, he didn't move. The noise from the hallway faded, the world outside forgotten. When he finally looked up, his eyes glistened. The letter lay open on his desk, and he whispered softly, "You have no idea how much that means." Keanu leaned back in his chair and read the letter again, slower this time, as though each word carried a kind of weight he didn't want to disturb. The ink had slightly smudged where a teardrop must have fallen. The lines were simple but honest, each one breathing with quiet gratitude. When he reached the final sentence, "Thank you for treating me like I mattered," he exhaled deeply and folded the letter over his chest, closing his eyes. For years, he had received thousands of letters. Some asked for help, others offered admiration, and many were from fans who simply wanted a signature. But this one was different. It wasn't about his fame or his films. It was about something small and real. He sat there for a long time, unmoving, lost in reflection. The memory of that morning came rushing back: the screech of the bus brakes, the startled silence, the fragile touch of the old woman's hand as she found her balance. He hadn't thought much about it after it happened. To him, it had just been the right thing to do. But now, as he held her words, he realized how deeply one small gesture had reached beyond that bus. He rose from his chair and walked over to the large window overlooking the city. From above, Los Angeles stretched endlessly, a sea of movement, lights, and noise. Yet beneath all that, he thought, were people like Eleanor. People who still believed in quiet goodness, who carried hope like a candle through the dark. Lydia knocked gently on the door, breaking his thoughts. "Did you read it?" she asked softly. He nodded, turning toward her. "Yeah," he said. "It's beautiful." "She really means it," Lydia said. "You should write her back." Keanu smiled faintly, the kind that carried more emotion than words could. "I think I'll do better than that." Later that evening, after most of the staff had gone home, he sat at his desk again with the letter laid out before him. He read it one final time, committing her words to memory. Then he opened his laptop and looked up her return address. It wasn't far, a modest neighborhood, not too different from the one he'd grown up in. He thought about how to approach it. The last thing he wanted was attention, cameras, or fanfare. This wasn't a public moment. It was something private, something sacred. He decided he would visit her quietly, without letting anyone know. He slipped the letter into his jacket pocket and locked his office. As he walked through the empty hallway, the faint hum of the building's lights echoed above him. It reminded him of the quiet that followed their conversation on the bus, the silence that had felt more human than any applause ever could. Outside, the night air was cool. He looked up at the stars scattered across the Los Angeles sky, thinking about how the smallest actions could ripple outward in ways no one ever expected. He whispered softly to himself, "Maybe kindness travels farther than we realize." With that, he started his motorcycle and rode off into the night, not to chase fame, not to be seen, but to keep a promise made in silence. Eleanor's letter rested safely in his pocket, close to his heart. She didn't know it yet, but the man she had written to was already on his way to say thank you, not for the letter, but for reminding him why he chose to live quietly, humbly, and with purpose. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the knock came at Eleanor Whitman's door. She had just finished watering her ferns and was settling into her chair with a crossword puzzle when the sound startled her. It wasn't the mail carrier he came in the morning, and it wasn't Mrs. Clark from next door. The knock was gentle, almost hesitant, as though the visitor wasn't sure he should be there at all. She rose slowly, smoothing her cardigan and adjusting her glasses before opening the door. And then she froze. Standing in the doorway, holding a small bouquet of lilies and a soft smile, was Keanu Reeves. For a long moment, Eleanor couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her mind raced to make sense of what she was seeing: the man from the movies, the man from the bus, now standing at her doorstep as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Mr. Reeves?" she finally managed, her voice trembling. He smiled warmly. "Hi, Eleanor. I hope I'm not intruding." She blinked, still dazed. "Good heavens, no. But how did you?" "I got your letter," he said gently, "and I wanted to thank you in person. What you wrote, it meant more than I can say." Tears welled in her eyes as she opened the door wider. "Oh, my dear, you didn't have to come all this way." He stepped inside carefully, handing her the lilies. "I wanted to. You reminded me that kindness works both ways." The apartment was small but full of life books stacked neatly by the armchair. Framed photos of Eleanor and her late husband George on every shelf. The faint scent of lavender filled the air. She gestured toward the couch. "Please, sit. I don't even know what to say." He chuckled softly. "Then don't say anything. Let's just have tea." She smiled through her tears. "Tea, I can do." While she busied herself in the kitchen, Keanu wandered gently through the living room, pausing at the photographs. There was George in his Navy uniform, George and Eleanor dancing in their youth, and another of the couple sitting together on a park bench. The love in those images was so strong it felt like it still filled the room. When Eleanor returned with a tray of tea and cookies, he helped her set it down. "You live in a beautiful place," he said. She laughed. "Oh, it's just a little corner of the world, but it's enough." Eleanor poured the tea carefully, her hands still trembling slightly. "You'll have to forgive me," she said with a shy smile. "I never thought I'd be serving tea to Keanu Reeves in my living room." He smiled warmly. "Please, just Keanu. I think I've had enough formality for one lifetime." She laughed softly, a fragile but genuine sound. "Then Keanu it is." They sat together on the small sofa, steam curling from their teacups, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains. The moment felt surreal yet comfortingly simple. There was no pretense, no distance, just two souls who had shared a fleeting moment of kindness and were now sitting across from each other as if they had known one another for years. "I have to tell you," Eleanor began, her eyes glistening, "I almost didn't write that letter. I thought you'd never see it." "I'm glad you did," he said quietly. "It reminded me why I try to keep life simple. The world can get loud, but kindness, real kindness, cuts through the noise." She nodded, looking down at her tea. "It's strange. I've lived 82 years, and still, that one small moment on the bus changed me. I'd started to think people didn't care anymore. They do," Keanu said softly. "They just forget how sometimes." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea and watching the afternoon light dance on the walls. Then Eleanor reached for a photo album, resting on the side table. "Would you like to meet George?" she asked, her voice tender. "I'd love to," he replied. She opened the album and began turning the pages. Pictures of a young couple laughing in front of a tiny car, holding hands at the beach, blowing out candles together. "He was my anchor," she said fondly. 51 years of marriage, and he never stopped making me laugh. Even when the doctors said it was time, he held my hand and told me not to stop believing in people. Keanu studied the photos closely, his expression gentle. He sounds like the kind of man I wish I'd met. He was the best kind, Eleanor said softly. And that day on the bus, when you helped me, I felt like he was there too, watching. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe he was. A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly dabbed it away with her sleeve. You know, Sophie, my granddaughter has been wanting me to learn how to use one of those fancy tablets. She says we could video chat, but I can't seem to figure it out. He chuckled. Well, that I can help with. She brightened instantly. Would you really? Of course, he said. He pulled out the small tablet that sat unopened on her counter, still wrapped in its box. Within minutes, he had it powered on and connected. He helped her create an account, showing her how to answer video calls. When the screen finally lit up with Sophie's smiling face, Eleanor gasped. Oh my goodness! Sophie, darling! Her granddaughter's voice crackled through the speaker. Grandma, is that Wade? Is that Keanu Reeves? Keanu laughed softly. Hi, Sophie. It's nice to meet you. Sophie covered her mouth, wide-eyed. Oh, my grandma, this is unbelievable! Eleanor's laughter filled the room. See, darling? I told you miracles still happen. Keanu smiled at both of them, his voice calm and warm. I don't know about miracles, he said, but sometimes life gives us second chances to be human. The three of them talked for nearly an hour. Sophie laughing, Eleanor glowing. Keanu listening quietly, occasionally sharing stories from his travels. When the call ended, Eleanor looked at him and said softly, Thank you. Not just for that day, but for this one too. He nodded. Thank you, Eleanor, for reminding me that small things matter most. Outside, the sun began to set, washing the sky in gold. Inside, 2 cups of tea sat empty, and the silence that followed was not the silence of loneliness. It was peace. The weeks that followed their reunion brought something neither Keanu nor Eleanor could have predicted. What began as a single moment of compassion on a city bus had grown into something much larger. A quiet movement spreading across Los Angeles like sunlight after rain. It started small. A few commuters began sharing short clips on social media of people offering their seats to strangers, picking up dropped bags, or helping parents lift strollers onto buses. They used the hashtag number #StandUpForOthers, inspired by the phrase that had appeared beneath Keanu's viral video. The words caught on quickly. Soon, bus stops across the city were covered in handwritten signs. Be kind first, help someone today, and every seat is a chance. Reporters began calling it the bus hero effect. Talk shows that had once replayed the viral clip now aired montages of everyday acts of kindness, commuters sharing umbrellas in the rain, teens helping elderly riders find their stop, even drivers leaving small notes of encouragement taped to bus seats. The Los Angeles Transit Authority noticed. Moved by the story, they commissioned a campaign to celebrate compassion in public spaces. One morning, new posters appeared inside every bus, a single empty seat bathed in sunlight, accompanied by the quote, "A hero doesn't need action scenes." Next to it was a photo of Eleanor smiling beside her cane, her name printed in gentle script beneath it. When Mrs. Clark showed her the poster, Eleanor couldn't stop laughing. "All I did was fall," she said between giggles. "Now they've gone and made me the face of kindness." Her laughter was genuine, but her eyes shimmered with emotion. Deep down, she understood what the poster really meant. It wasn't celebrating her stumble, it was honoring the way one person's compassion could lift an entire city. Keanu, meanwhile, kept a copy of the poster folded in his jacket pocket. Whenever someone mentioned the campaign, he smiled humbly and said, "That was all, Eleanor." But he knew the truth. She had helped people see the power of a single gesture. Even bus drivers began noticing a change. One veteran driver told a reporter, People are different now. They look up when someone boards. They make space. It's like everyone's remembering how to be decent again. The movement soon spread beyond Los Angeles. Other cities adopted similar messages. Chicago buses carried signs reading "Small acts, big difference." In New York, subway stations posted banners reminding commuters to stand up for others. The simple message had become universal. In the midst of all the attention, Eleanor's life changed in small but meaningful ways. Strangers began recognizing her on the street. They smiled, waved, or stopped just to say thank you. Once, while she waited for her usual bus, a young mother offered her a seat and said, "You taught us how to care again." Eleanor blushed, insisting she hadn't taught anyone anything. "I just had clumsy feet and a lucky guardian angel," she said with a laugh. Her neighbors started checking in more often. Someone left flowers at her door. A teenage boy from her building began carrying her groceries upstairs every Friday without being asked. "For Miss Whitman," he would say proudly, as if helping her made him part of something bigger. And in a way, it did. Eleanor's granddaughter Sophie loved watching it unfold. Every week, she would call to share a new story about someone who had written to her grandmother. "Grandma, there's a woman in Seattle who started a kindness club at her school," Sophie said one evening. "They watched your video in class." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Imagine that. Me inspiring a classroom from my armchair." Sophie smiled. "You did more than that. You reminded people that kindness is contagious." The following month, the Los Angeles Transit Authority invited Eleanor to a small ceremony. They wanted to dedicate a bench at one of the central bus terminals in her honor. She was hesitant at first. She didn't like attention, but Keanu encouraged her to go. "It's not for fame," he told her. "It's for the message." When the day came, she wore her favorite lavender scarf, the same one she'd worn on the bus that morning. The event was simple, but heartfelt. Commuters, city workers, and even school children gathered around as the mayor unveiled the plaque. It read, "In honor of Eleanor Whitman and every act of kindness that begins without applause." Eleanor pressed her hand over her heart as the small crowd clapped. She leaned toward Keanu and whispered, "You should be up there, not me." He shook his head. "You fell, Eleanor, but you helped the world stand taller." Her eyes filled with tears. "You always know what to say," she said softly. Later that afternoon, they rode a city bus together, this time without cameras or attention. The driver recognized them, but said nothing, offering only a quiet nod of respect. As the bus moved through downtown, Eleanor watched people around her offering seats, sharing smiles, helping an elderly man find his transfer stop. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. The world, in its small corners, was remembering how to care. She turned to Keanu with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think people will forget again someday?" He looked out the window, watching the city blur by. "Maybe," he said. "But that's why reminders like this matter. Kindness needs practice, like anything else." Eleanor smiled at that, her hand resting lightly on her cane. "Then, I suppose we'll just have to keep reminding them." When the bus reached her stop, Keanu helped her down carefully, as he had the first time. The sidewalk gleamed under the late afternoon light. She steadied herself, looked up at him, and said, "Thank you, Keanu. Not just for helping me that day, but for helping the world see what goodness looks like." He smiled softly, eyes kind. "You gave them the example, Eleanor." I just stood up. She laughed, her voice full of life. "Well, you did it gracefully." As the bus pulled away, Eleanor waved, her lavender scarf fluttering in the breeze. Behind her, a new poster had just been placed on the side of the bus. It showed the same chair, bathed in morning light, and beneath it, a simple line: "Be the reason someone stands up today." 1 month later, a plain white envelope arrived at Keanu's home. It bore the embossed seal of the Los Angeles Transit Authority. Inside was an invitation printed on heavy paper. You are cordially invited to a ceremony honoring civic kindness and community compassion. At the bottom, in neat cursive, was a note handwritten by the director. Your actions reminded the city of its heart. We'd be honored by your presence. Keanu read it twice, then set it down on his kitchen counter. He wasn't one for ceremonies. He had spent much of his life avoiding spotlights, preferring to let quiet moments speak for themselves. The idea of standing before cameras to receive thanks for something as natural as helping someone didn't sit comfortably with him. Still, as he sipped his coffee, he thought about Eleanor, about the laughter in her small living room, the warmth of her lavender scarf, the way she spoke about George, and kindness, as if they were one and the same. He knew she would likely be there, and something in him stirred. He called Lydia at his studio later that afternoon. "I got an invitation," he said. "It's for that kindness event the transit folks are planning." "I saw that," she said. "They're making it small. No press coverage, just a few guests." He smiled, faintly. "Good. That's the only way I'd go." And so, a week later, Keanu arrived quietly at the downtown bus depot where the ceremony was being held. The space had been transformed for the occasion. Buses were parked in neat rows, their engines silent. Folding chairs had been arranged beneath an awning. There were no red carpets, no fanfare, just a few dozen city workers, a handful of reporters, and a modest wooden podium. As he stepped inside, he spotted Eleanor immediately. She was seated near the front, wrapped in her lavender shawl, her eyes bright and curious. When she saw him, her face lit up in a smile so genuine, it made him pause. He walked over and bent slightly to greet her. "You look beautiful," he said. She blushed lightly. "And you're early. That's rare for a movie star." He laughed softly. "Guess I didn't want to miss the bus." Her laughter joined his, warm and light, echoing softly through the room. Soon after, the ceremony began. The director of the Transit Authority spoke briefly about the growing number Stand Up for Others movement and the unexpected impact one small act of kindness had sparked. She gestured toward Keanu and Eleanor. "Today isn't about, quote, fame," she said. "It's about the quiet heroes who remind us who we can be." The audience applauded gently, the sound polite but heartfelt. When the applause faded, the director invited Keanu to the front. He walked up slowly, hands in his pockets, the faintest smile on his face. The flashes from a few discreet cameras caught the light in his eyes, but he didn't seem to notice. To him, this wasn't about recognition. It was about remembering. Behind the podium stood a simple wooden plaque draped in white cloth. The director stepped aside and said softly, "Mr. Reeves, would you do us the honor?" Keanu nodded, took hold of the edge of the cloth, and lifted it away. Beneath it, engraved into bronze, were the words, "In honor of every act of kindness that begins without applause." The crowd went still. The sentence hung in the air like a quiet prayer. Beneath the inscription, etched in smaller letters, were the names Keanu Reeves and Eleanor Whitman. Keanu studied the plaque for a moment, then turned toward the audience. His voice, calm and steady, carried easily through the quiet hall. "I don't really know what to say," he began. "I didn't plan anything, because what happened wasn't planned. It wasn't a performance. It was just what felt right." He paused, glancing at Eleanor, who smiled up at him with proud, tearful eyes. "We're all passengers," he continued. "Every day we share this ride, buses, streets, cities, the world. Sometimes we forget that everyone sitting next to us is carrying something invisible. A story, a weight, a hope. And maybe if we took a moment to notice that, we'd realize how easy it is to make the ride a little gentler for someone else." The audience remained silent, completely absorbed. Even the hum of the nearby buses seemed to fade. "I don't think kindness should be rare," he said softly. "It should be normal, And if this plaque reminds even one person to look up, to care, to help, then that's all the applause I'll ever need." He stepped back from the microphone. The crowd rose to their feet in quiet, respectful applause, not loud, not showy, but filled with something genuine. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. When he returned to her side, she reached out and took his hand. "You spoke beautifully," she whispered. He smiled gently. "I just said what you already taught everyone." After the ceremony ended, small groups of people gathered to take photos near the plaque. Keanu declined interviews, shaking hands and offering simple thank yous. When one young reporter asked if he felt like a hero, he chuckled and said, "No. Heroes do what they do when no one's watching. I just happened to be caught on camera." Outside the depot, the afternoon sunlight shimmered across the pavement. Eleanor and Keanu walked together slowly toward the exit. A light breeze tugged at her lavender shawl, and for a moment he reached out to steady it for her. She smiled at him. "You know, George used to say life's like a bus ride. You can't control who gets on or off, but you can decide how you treat the people sitting next to you." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "He sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "And today, he would have been proud. Not just of you, but of everyone who stood up." They reached the curb, and Keanu hailed a passing bus. The driver recognized them immediately, his eyes wide with awe. But Keanu simply smiled and said, "2 passengers, please." As the doors opened, he helped Eleanor up the steps, just as he had that day, weeks ago. The driver didn't say a word, he just tipped his cap in quiet respect. When the bus pulled away, a few people on the sidewalk waved. Eleanor looked out the window, her reflection merging with the city beyond. "You know," she said softly, "for the first time in years, I feel like the world's heading in the right direction." Keanu glanced out the opposite window, watching the sun fall over the streets of Los Angeles. "Maybe," he said, smiling faintly, "or maybe it's just starting to slow down enough for us to notice the good again." The bus rolled on, its wheels humming softly beneath them, carrying 2 people who had turned an ordinary moment into something extraordinary. Proof that kindness, once sparked, keeps moving forward. Miguel Alvarez sat at his desk late one night, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. His YouTube page, once full of prank videos and cheap laughs, looked suddenly hollow. The viral clip of Keanu and Eleanor was still pinned to the top 40 million views and counting. Comments poured in every minute, praising his decision to share something good. But the truth was, Miguel hadn't planned it that way. He hadn't meant to start a movement. He scrolled through his old uploads, scaring strangers on the subway. Fake celebrity prank. Phone drop challenge. Each thumbnail now made him wince. They had earned him attention, yes, but not the kind he could be proud of. He thought about that day, on the bus, the silence, the fall, the quiet dignity of the man who helped without hesitation. That moment had changed him in a way no viral fame ever could. With a deep breath, he opened his creator dashboard and began deleting the old videos, one by one. Each click felt like peeling away another layer of who he used to be. When the page was finally blank except for the bus video, he renamed his channel. The new title read, "Everyday Goodness." He spent the next few weeks walking around Los Angeles, filming small acts of kindness, street musicians, sharing food with the homeless, a mechanic fixing a stranded motorist's tire for free, children helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries. No background music, no tricks, no filters, just moments of humanity. His subscribers grew slower this time, but the comments felt different. Real. "This made me smile today. Thank you for posting something that restores faith in people. We need more of this." Miguel began to understand something that Keanu had shown the world, that authenticity has more power than mine, spectacle, One afternoon, while researching community projects, he came across a flyer for a local volunteer drive at a senior center near downtown. He hesitated at first. He had never volunteered before, but something inside urged him to go. He packed his camera and headed there the next morning. The center was modest but welcoming, with bright murals painted by local children and shelves stacked with board games and books. As Miguel helped set up chairs for an activities session, he caught sight of a familiar face sitting by the window. It took him a moment to place her, but when she turned, smiling at a group of volunteers, he froze. It was Eleanor Whitman. For a moment, Miguel just stood there, unsure what to do. The woman whose fall had changed his life was right in front of him, smiling, chatting, alive with the same quiet grace that had captured the world's heart. He hesitated, debating whether to approach her. What if she was angry that he had filmed her without permission? What if she resented the attention? But before he could overthink it, Eleanor looked up and noticed him. Her eyes narrowed slightly, then widened in recognition. "Miguel?" she said softly. "You were on the bus." His heart skipped. "You remember me?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "It's hard to forget the young man who made me famous by accident." Miguel flushed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for filming you. Without asking, I never meant to make a spectacle out of something real. I just thought people should see it. But I should have asked." Eleanor reached out, her hand warm and steady on his arm. "Don't apologize," she said. "If you hadn't shared it, none of this would have happened. You didn't take something from me, you helped give something back to the world." He exhaled, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he said softly. She tilted her head. "And what brings you here today?" "I'm volunteering," he replied, "trying to film stories that matter. I wanted to show the good that's out there, instead of chasing cheap laughs. I guess you and Mr. Reeves made me rethink what I've been doing." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be." That afternoon, Miguel helped the staff serve lunch and record short interviews with the residents about acts of kindness they'd received in their lives. When he asked Eleanor if she'd like to share a message on camera, she agreed immediately. They set up near a sunny window, with Eleanor sitting comfortably in her lavender shawl. The camera rolled, and Miguel asked gently, "Mrs. Whitman, what would you like people to remember from everything that's happened?" Eleanor took a breath and looked directly into the lens. "Kindness isn't a headline," she said. "It's a choice. Every day, we can choose to look away or to care. That day on the bus, someone cared, and that made all the difference." She paused, her voice softening. "You don't have to be rich or famous to change the world. You just have to see people." Miguel lowered the camera, speechless. The room was silent for a long moment before the other volunteers began to clap quietly. He turned the camera back toward himself, visibly moved. "This," he said, "is why I do what I do now." Later that evening, Miguel edited the footage carefully, keeping it simple, no music, no fancy cuts, just Eleanor's voice and her message. He uploaded it with the title, "The Lady from the Bus, One More Lesson." Within hours, it spread across social media like wildfire. People commented from around the world, "She's right, we need to start seeing each other again." This made me cry. Thank you, Miguel. It's rare to feel something so real online. The next morning, Miguel woke up to a text from an unknown number. It read, "Thank you for continuing what started that day." Attached was a short video clip, a repost of Eleanor's message, shared privately by Keanu Reeves to his close friends, with the caption, "See what kindness grows into?" Miguel sat in these, stunned silence for a moment, then smiled, tears welling in his eyes. It wasn't about fame anymore. It wasn't about views. It was about the chain reaction that began with one simple gesture. A man stood up, a woman found hope, and a young man learned that the world changes not through noise, but through compassion. At the senior center, Eleanor watched Miguel's video on a borrowed tablet, her eyes shining as she whispered, "George, you'd be proud. The world's listening again." As summer turned to autumn, time began to slow for Eleanor Whitman. Her health had started to waver. Some mornings she woke with less strength in her legs, and her breath came shorter than before. But her spirit, bright, gentle, and endlessly grateful, only grew stronger. Her living room became a garden of letters. Stacks of envelopes arrived daily from across the country, handwritten notes, postcards, and children's drawings, all addressed simply to the lady from the bus. The mail carrier, who had come to know her story, smiled every time he delivered another bundle. Eleanor read each letter carefully, sometimes aloud, sometimes to herself. There were words from strangers she would never meet. A young nurse in Chicago who said she showed the bus video to new trainees. A father in Florida who wrote that his teenage son now stood up for seniors on the subway. A group of college students from Toronto who started a project called Kindness Commute. Each message ended the same way, with gratitude. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, Keanu arrived quietly at her door. He carried a small bag of books and a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. She greeted him with a tired but radiant smile. "Keanu," she said softly, "you always come at the perfect time." He grinned. "I like to think kindness keeps a good schedule." She laughed, her voice still full of warmth. "Then, I suppose I should make you tea." They sat together in her living room, the kettle humming softly in the background. He helped her open a few letters from the growing pile, reading them aloud in his calm, steady voice. "Dear Mrs. Whitman," he began from one envelope, "thank you for reminding us what matters. I watched your story with my daughter, and now we take the bus together every Sunday just to talk to strangers and share smiles." Eleanor closed her eyes as he read, the words washing over her like a gentle tide. "It's strange," she murmured. "All I did was fall, and now people are standing taller." Keanu reached for her hand. "You gave them something to look up to, Eleanor. You reminded them that kindness still exists." She smiled faintly. "And you gave it shape." Outside, the world went on, cars rushing, phones ringing, city life buzzing. But inside her small apartment, everything felt still. The noise faded to the hum of the kettle and the faint rustle of paper as Keanu carefully placed the opened letters into a box marked "To reread on good days." As the days shortened and the city cooled, Eleanor's home grew warmer with the quiet rhythm of companionship. Sophie had flown in from Portland to spend a few weeks with her grandmother, filling the little apartment with youthful laughter and soft reminders to take medicine on time. Together they made small meals, played old records, and watched the sun drift through the curtains. Keanu visited often, always unannounced but never unexpected. Sometimes he brought flowers, sometimes soup, and sometimes nothing but a few hours of quiet company. He never treated Eleanor like a fragile soul. He spoke to her the same way he always had, as if she were a lifelong friend. On one visit, Sophie met him for the first time in person. When she opened the door and saw him standing there with his usual gentle smile, she froze for a second, unable to find her words. "Mr. Reeves," she stammered, "I thank you. Doesn't even begin to cover it." He smiled softly. "Then just call me Keanu. And you're Sophie, right? Your grandmother talks about you every time I visit." Her eyes welled with tears as she hugged him suddenly, catching him off guard. "You gave us time we wouldn't have had," she whispered. He hugged her back without a word. It was the kind of embrace that said more than gratitude ever could. That afternoon, The three of them shared tea while Keanu read aloud from one of the books he'd brought, an old poetry collection George had once loved. His voice was calm and steady, carrying the verses through the room like music. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, eyes closed, smiling faintly. "He used to read that same poem to me," she said quietly. "It's funny how life finds its way back to you." Sophie looked between them, realizing this unlikely friendship had become something sacred, two lives that had touched by chance, now bound by grace. Later that week, the letters kept coming, hundreds of them, each one carrying its own story of kindness reborn. Some contained small donations to the senior center. Others came from schools, with children's crayon drawings of buses, hearts, and simple phrases like, "Be kind," or "Stand up for others." Eleanor read them in small batches, her voice sometimes trembling, sometimes laughing. One morning she handed Keanu a letter from a young girl in Texas who had written, "I helped my grandma walk home today because of you. I think you're both heroes." Eleanor smiled as she passed it to him. "You see, Keanu, the world still listens when we whisper." He looked down at the letter for a long moment. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and sometimes the whispers echo." As the weeks passed, the pace of life around them seemed to slow. The kettle whistled at the same time every afternoon, the radio hummed old jazz songs, and the city noise outside softened to a distant murmur. Time no longer felt like something to measure, it was something to savor. Sophie began compiling the letters into a scrapbook, carefully placing each one with handwritten captions. She titled it, "The Circle of Gratitude." On the first page, she glued a printed photo of her grandmother sitting beside Keanu on the bus from months earlier. The moment that had started everything. When Eleanor saw it, she touched the page lightly and said, "That was the day I stopped feeling invisible." Keanu placed his hand gently over hers, and the day the world remembered how to see. Even as Eleanor grew weaker, her spirit remained luminous. The apartment, once quiet and ordinary, had become a place of living memory, a room where kindness had found its echo. The sound of laughter lingered long after conversations ended, and the simple hum of the kettle became a heartbeat of its own. Outside, the city of Los Angeles continued to rush, but inside that small apartment, time had slowed to something tender, eternal, and true, a circle of gratitude that began with a fall and rose again through every act of love that followed. It happened on a quiet morning in late November. The city outside was still half asleep, its sky painted in soft gray light. Inside her small apartment, Eleanor Whitman rested peacefully in her bed, her breathing slow, steady, then still. On the nightstand beside her was a small photograph, the one of her and Keanu, taken during one of his visits, both smiling, both unaware that this would become the image so many would remember her by. When Sophie found her later that morning, there were no signs of struggle or pain, only serenity. The kettle had been filled the night before, as if she'd planned another day of tea and letters. Her glasses lay neatly beside a half-finished crossword. She had drifted away, the same way she had lived, with quiet grace. Word spread quickly. The news was simple and dignified. Eleanor Whitman, known to millions as the lady from the bus, has passed away at 83. Messages poured in from every corner of the world. People wrote about how her story had changed them, how her fall and rise had become a symbol of humanity rediscovered. Keanu was on a film set in Santa Barbara when he got the call from Sophie. There was a long silence on the line before he finally spoke. "Thank you for letting me know," he said softly. "She was extraordinary. I think she'd like it if you came," Sophie whispered through tears. "I'll be there," he promised. The funeral was held at a small church, tucked away in the hills overlooking Los Angeles. It was the kind of place Eleanor would have loved. Quiet, warm, filled with light, streaming through stained glass. The air smelled faintly, of lilies and old wood. By the time the service began, every pew was filled. But what made it remarkable was who had come. There were bus drivers in uniform, commuters who had written to her, students who had watched her interviews for school projects, and elderly strangers who said she reminded them of their mothers. Most had never met her in life, yet every face carried the same emotion, a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sophie stood at the front, trembling slightly as she spoke. "My grandmother never wanted fame," she said. "She wanted people to care, and somehow she managed to remind the whole world that compassion still matters. She used to say, 'Kindness is contagious.'" I guess she was right. As her words echoed through the room, Keanu sat in the last pew, wearing a simple black suit, his head bowed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough, a quiet tribute to a friendship that had changed them both. When the final hymn faded, the pastor invited anyone who wished to share a few words to come forward. One by one, strangers stood up, people from all walks of life, bound together by one woman's grace. A bus driver spoke first, his voice deep and steady. "Mrs. Whitman used to ride my route sometimes after the video went viral. She always smiled, always asked how my day was going. I didn't know her well, but she treated everyone like a friend. We don't get that often anymore." Next came a young mother. "I showed my little boy her story," she said. "Now, every time we take the bus, he looks for someone to help. He says, 'Mom, maybe I can be like the man who stood up for the lady.' That's what she left behind, an example we can pass on." Others followed, a college student who started a kindness club, a teacher who used Eleanor's story to teach empathy. Even Miguel, the young man who had filmed the video, came forward, standing before the crowd with his camera hanging from his neck. "I didn't realize that one clip would change so many lives," he said softly. "It changed mine, most of all. Mrs. Whitman told me that kindness isn't about being noticed. It's about noticing others. I'll never forget that." His voice broke slightly as he stepped away. Sophie closed the service by reading a short passage from her grandmother's favorite poem. Her voice trembled, but carried through the quiet church. "When you are gone, let me not grieve for long, but let the echo of your laughter live on in my heart." When the service ended, the congregation slowly rose and filed outside. The air was cool and bright, the sunlight breaking through the clouds like a soft benediction. Eleanor's casket, adorned with a garland of white lilies, was placed gently into the waiting hearse. People laid flowers on top: roses, daisies, carnations, each a silent thank you for the kindness she had inspired. Keanu stayed behind until the crowd had thinned. He spoke quietly with Sophie, who looked weary but peaceful. "She adored you," Sophie said, her voice low. "You were like the son she never had." He shook his head. "She gave me more than I ever gave her." Sophie managed a faint smile. "Then maybe that's how kindness really works. It always circles back." He embraced her gently before stepping outside, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the city, Keanu boarded a city bus, the same line he had taken months ago, the same route where everything had begun. The driver, an older man in a crisp uniform, recognized him immediately but said nothing. He simply nodded as Keanu handed him the fare. The bus was nearly empty, bathed in the golden light of sunset. Keanu took a seat near the middle, the very one Eleanor had occupied that day. For a moment, he sat still, the hum of the engine, the only sound. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single white rose. He placed it gently on the seat beside him. No speech, no cameras, no crowd, just one quiet gesture in a moving bus, the same way it had all started. The driver caught his reflection in the mirror. Their eyes met briefly, and the man gave a small nod of respect. Keanu returned it with a soft smile. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. As the bus rolled down the familiar route, passing the same stops, the same buildings, Keanu watched the world through the window, the streets alive with motion, strangers crossing paths, lives intersecting for seconds at a time. Somewhere out there, he thought, someone was offering a seat to another passenger, or lending a hand, or simply noticing a soul who might have gone unseen. When his stop came, he stood, glanced once more at the rows, and whispered, "Thank you, Eleanor." Then, he stepped off into the cool evening air, disappearing into the city's rhythm quiet, humble, unchanged at heart. Behind him, the bus continued on its route. The white rose swayed gently with each turn, a living reminder that kindness, once set in motion, never truly stops. The sun dipped low over Los Angeles, turning the city into a sea of soft amber and gold. Keanu walked slowly down the quiet stretch of Wilshire Boulevard, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. The day had been long, but peaceful, a day that reminded him how simple moments could hold the greatest meaning. The streets buzzed gently with the rhythm of evening life. Cars moved lazily through intersections. Streetlights flickered awake, and people waited at bus stops with weary eyes and coffee cups. The scent of roasted nuts and fresh bread from a nearby bakery drifted through the air. He paused for a moment, taking it all in the hum of a city alive, unaware of how its smallest gestures could shape lives. Across the street, a bus pulled to the curb. The doors opened with a sigh, and passengers began to board. A young woman with a heavy backpack stepped aside to let an elderly man go first. A teenager stood up to offer his seat to a mother holding a child. No one was filming, no one was watching. It was just life unfolding, quietly beautiful in its ordinariness. Keanu smiled faintly. The world had changed since that morning months ago, but not because of fame or headlines. It had changed because people had remembered something timeless. The strength of gentleness, the courage of kindness, the grace of simply noticing one another. He walked closer to the bus stop and stood in front of the glass panel where an old poster still hung. The image had faded from sunlight, but the words were still clear. A hero doesn't need action scenes, just a chair. Beneath it, in small letters, it read, "In honor of Eleanor Whitman, who reminded us all to stand up for others." His reflection stared back at him in the glass, mingling with the faces of strangers waiting behind it. For a moment, it looked like they were all one, a quiet reminder that every person carries the same capacity for compassion. A breeze moved down the street, stirring the ends of his hair. The evening light shimmered on the glass as his faint reflection blended into the faces of the crowd. In that fragile golden second, it felt as though Eleanor was there too, her laughter in the hum of traffic, her kindness in the small exchanges. Between strangers, her legacy carried forward, one bus ride at a time. He glanced down the road, watching the next bus approach. The driver slowed as it neared, the headlights brightening against the fading sky. The bus came to a stop with a soft hiss. Keanu stepped back to let others board first. A few people nodded politely as they passed, their faces lined with the fatigue of ordinary life. One young man paused to help an elderly woman climb the steps, steadying her by the elbow. She smiled and patted his hand before taking a seat. That simple gesture made Keanu's lips curve into a faint, knowing smile. It was the same kindness, repeated in 1,000 different ways, proof that goodness had taken root. The driver caught his eye through the mirror and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement between two witnesses of how far a single act can travel. Keanu didn't board the bus this time. He stood quietly at the stop, watching as the passengers settled in. The doors closed, the engine hummed, and the bus rolled forward into the sunset. Through the window, he saw the old woman sitting comfortably, the young man still standing beside her. He could almost hear Eleanor's gentle voice echoing in his mind. Kindness doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be felt. He took a deep breath, looking out toward the horizon where the sky glowed in shades of rose and gold. The world seemed to slow, as if giving space for one final thought to linger. Sometimes, he realized, the world doesn't need more heroes. It doesn't need louder voices or grand gestures. What it needs is simpler. More seats offered, more hands extended, more eyes that truly see. He stayed there for a few moments longer, the city alive around him, buses passing, children laughing, couples hurrying home. No one recognized him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He was just another soul walking the same streets as everyone else, blending back into the flow of life, carrying a story that belonged to everyone now. The wind picked up slightly, brushing past his jacket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded photograph. Eleanor sitting by her window, smiling at the camera, her lavender shawl draped across her shoulders. He looked at it for a moment, then tucked it carefully back inside. "Thank you," he whispered. The last bus of the evening arrived, its headlights cutting through the twilight. Keanu turned away and began walking down the sidewalk. The sound of the bus doors closing faded into the distance. His footsteps were soft, steady, blending with the rhythm of the city around him. A group of teenagers on a nearby bench were talking about the viral story again, their words floating through the air. "That's the guy who helped the old lady, right?" one asked. "Yeah," another replied. "Guess it really happened." Keanu smiled faintly, but didn't turn around. He kept walking, knowing that the story no longer belonged to him or to Eleanor. It belonged to everyone who believed in small acts of grace. As the sun finally disappeared behind the skyline, the lights of Los Angeles shimmered to life. The city looked softer somehow, as though its edges had been smoothed by compassion. And somewhere on a bus rolling through the night, a young man stood to offer his seat, unknowingly continuing the legacy of two strangers who had shown the world that kindness, once given, never fades. It only multiplies. The scene faded with Keanu standing at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. The glow of a passing bus reflected across his face. He smiled one last time, watching as the people inside shared quiet gestures of care, proof that goodness was alive and moving, one ride at a time. Voiceover. Sometimes the world doesn't need more heroes. It just needs more seats offered, more hands extended, more eyes that truly see. Reflection question. Have you ever seen a small act of kindness change an entire day? Viewer suggestion prompt. What kind of everyday hero story would you like to see next with Keanu Reeves?